In the early 1980s, the video game industry was not just a business, it was a gold rush. Atari was the fastest-growing company in the history of the United States. They were printing money so fast that they did not know what to do with it. But within a single year, that multi-billion-dollar empire completely collapsed, leaving behind bankruptcies, shattered dreams, and millions of plastic cartridges buried in a desert. Welcome to another episode of History Glitch, where we explore the moments when humanity's operating systems catastrophically fail. Today, we are stepping away from exploding rockets and nuclear meltdowns to examine a different kind of disaster, a digital apocalypse caused entirely by corporate hubris and terrible code. Based on the fantastic book, The Ultimate History of Video Games by Stephen L. Kent, we are going to look at the video game crash of 1983 and the worst video game ever made. To understand this glitch, you have to understand the absolute arrogance of Atari at its peak. Atari was owned by Warner Communications, and the executives at Warner treated video games like movies. They believed that if you slapped a famous name on a plastic cartridge, people would buy it regardless of how bad the actual game was. They had just made a fortune porting Pac-Man to the Atari 2600, even though the port was notoriously terrible. The executives learned the exact wrong lesson they learned, that quality did not matter, only marketing mattered. This toxic mindset perfectly set the stage for the greatest entertainment disaster in history. In the summer of 1982, Steven Spielberg's movie E.T. the Extraterrestrial was shattering box office records around the world. Warner Communications wanted a piece of that massive cultural phenomenon. They negotiated directly with Spielberg and paid an astonishing $21 million just for the rights to make an E.T. video game. It was the most expensive licensing deal ever made at the time. But there was a massive problem. The deal was finalized in late July, and Atari demanded that the game be on store shelves in time for the Christmas shopping season. To hit that deadline, the game had to be completely finished, manufactured, and shipped by September. That left exactly 5.5 weeks for a programmer to actually design code and test the entire game. For context, a normal Atari game took roughly 6 to 8 months to develop. Giving a programmer 5 weeks to build the biggest game in the company's history was not just a challenge, it was an impossible suicide mission. Atari handed this impossible task to a brilliant but overconfident programmer named Howard Scott Warshaw. Warshaw was a rock star at Atari. He had recently designed the hit game Yar's Revenge and a successful adaptation of Raiders of the Lost Ark. When the executives asked him if he could make an E.T. game in 5 weeks, his ego took over and he said yes. He believed he could achieve the impossible. Warshaw worked around the clock, fueled by adrenaline and sheer willpower. He even had an arcade machine installed in his office and slept on a cot. But game design is a complex process of balancing mechanics, and without time to test and refine Warshaw's code, became a confusing, frustrating mess. Instead of a heartwarming adventure, he created a game where a blocky green alien constantly fell into inescapable pits. Players had to wander aimlessly, stretching their pixelated necks to find random phone pieces while constantly running out of energy. The gameplay was not just bad, it was fundamentally broken. But the executives at Atari did not care. They did not even playtest it. They were so confident that the E.T. name alone would sell millions that they bypassed all quality control. They ordered the manufacturing of roughly 5 million E.T. cartridges, which was actually more than the total number of Atari consoles that existed in the world. They assumed people would buy the console just to play this game. In December 1982, E.T. hit the shelves. It was a massive commercial launch backed by millions of dollars in television advertising. At first, it sold well based purely on the hype. But then the kids actually played it. The word of mouth spread like wildfire. The game was practically unplayable. Frustrated children returned the game to stores by the hundreds of thousands. Retailers who had stocked up on millions of copies suddenly found themselves with mountains of worthless plastic. The sheer volume of returned ET cartridges triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. Store owners realized that video games were not a guaranteed gold mine, they were a volatile fad. Retailers slashed prices trying to get rid of the inventory. Games that once cost $40 were being dumped into bargain bins for $5. This desperate price cutting destroyed the perceived value of all video games. The market was suddenly flooded with garbage. Dozens of third-party companies had been churning out terrible knockoff games trying to cash in on the Atari boom. Consumers lost all faith in the industry. The bottom fell out. In 1983, the video game industry experienced a massive, terrifying crash. Revenues plummeted by 97%. Companies went bankrupt overnight. Arcades closed down. The industry was effectively dead in the United States. And Atari, the fastest-growing company in American history, was hemorrhaging hundreds of millions of dollars. They were left with vast warehouses full of unsold ET cartridges, a physical monument to their ultimate failure. The cost of storing these useless cartridges was immense. So in a desperate move to dispose of their shame, Atari loaded 14 semi-trucks full of games and drove them to a remote landfill in Alamogordo, New Mexico. Under the cover of darkness, they dumped millions of cartridges into a massive trench and then poured a layer of concrete over them to make sure nobody could ever dig them up. For decades, the Atari landfill was considered an urban legend, a myth whispered among gamers. But in 2014, a documentary crew actually excavated the site and proved it was true. They pulled crushed ET cartridges out of the desert sand, a perfect archaeological artifact of a digital disaster. The crash of 1983 is the ultimate history glitch, because it proves that technology and marketing cannot overcome terrible engineering. It is a stark warning that ignoring the quality of your code and treating your audience with contempt will inevitably lead to a total system collapse. It took years, and the arrival of the Nintendo Entertainment System with its strict quality control lockout chip to finally resurrect the industry. The ET disaster remains a cautionary tale for every software developer and executive, reminding us that even the biggest empires can be buried in the desert if they ignore the fundamental rules of good design.